In 1992, Shanda Sharer, a 12-year-old girl, experienced a horrific murder in Madison, Indiana, USA. Shanda was kidnapped by Melinda Loveless and 3 of Melinda's other friends. They tortured and assaulted Shanda for hours before killing her by burning her in a field. The main motive of the case is Melinda Loveless's jealousy and hatred towards Shanda due to their complicated emotional relationship. This case caused a stir and attracted the attention of the community and media. All 4 young women involved in this case were arrested and later convicted. Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett were sentenced to life in prison, while Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence received indeterminate prison sentences. The murder of Shanda Sharer has become a symbol of child crimes and has raised many questions about the legal system and child protection. It caused deep shock and grief to the community and was one of the most horrifying cases in American history. Melinda Loveless. Melinda Loveless was born in New Albany, Indiana on October 28, 1975, the youngest of 3 daughters to Marjorie and Larry Loveless. Larry was drafted into the United States Army during the Vietnam War, and he was considered a hero upon his return. His wife later described him as a pervert who would wear her and her daughter's underwear and makeup, was incapable of being monogamous, and had feelings of jealousy and amusement. Seeing her having sex with other men and women, they lived in or near New Albany, Indiana, throughout Melinda's childhood. Larry worked sporadically for the Southern Railroad after his military service. His profession allows him to work whenever is most convenient for him. In 1972, Larry became a probationary officer with the New Albany Police Department, but he was fired after 8 months when he and his accomplices assaulted a black man whom Larry accused of sleeping with his wife. In 1988, Larry worked as a mailman for a short time, but quit after 3 months and did very little work, taking most of the mail home to destroy. Marjorie has worked intermittently since 1974. With both parents working, the family was financially well off, living in the upper middle-class suburb of Floyd's Knobs, Indiana. Larry often did not share his income with his family, made mortgage payments, and impulsively spent any money he earned on himself, especially guns, motorcycles, and cars. He filed for bankruptcy in 1980, and extended family members often described Loveless daughters visiting their home hungry and seemingly without food at home. For much of their relationship, Larry was unfaithful to his wife, and they frequently had an open marriage. They often went to bars in Louisville, where Loveless would pretend to be a doctor or dentist and introduce Marjorie as his girlfriend. He would also share her with some of his friends at work, which she found disgusting. During a drunken spell with another couple at their home, Marjorie attempted suicide, an act she repeated many times throughout her daughter's childhood. When Melinda was 9 years old, Larry forced Margie to join a gang, which she then tried to drown. After that incident, she refused to have sex with him for a month, until he violently raped her in front of their daughter. In the summer of 1986, after she refused to let him go home with 2 women, he met at a bar. Larry beat Marjorie so severely that she had to be hospitalized. He was convicted of battery. The extent of Larry's abuse of his daughters and other children is unknown. Many court testimonies claim that he fondled Michelle as a child, sexually abused Marjorie's 13-year-old sister from the beginning of their marriage, and sexually abused the girl's cousin Teddy from 10 to 14 years old, and both older girls said he sexually abused them, although Melinda did not. Admitted that this had happened to her. She slept in bed with him until he abandoned his family when she was 14 years old. In court, Teddy describes an incident in which Larry tied up all 3 sisters in a garage and raped them repeatedly. However, the sisters did not confirm this account. Larry insulted his daughters and fired a shotgun at Michelle when she was 7, intentionally missing her. He also embarrassed his children by finding their underwear and smelling it in front of other family members. Lori Tackett. Mary Lorraine Tackett was born in Madison, Indiana, on October 5, 1974. Her mother was a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian, and her father was a factory worker with 2 criminal records in the 1960s. Tackett claimed that she was sexually abused at least twice as a child, at the ages of 5 and 12. In May 1989, her mother discovered Tackett changing her jeans at school. And after a confrontation that night, her mother tried to strangle her. Social workers became involved, and Tackett's parents agreed to an unannounced visit to ensure that child abuse did not occur. Tackett and her mother often clashed. At one point, her mother went to Hope Rippey's house after learning that Rippey's father had bought a Ouija board for the girls. She asks to burn the plaque and exorcise the Rippey house. Hope Rippey. Hope Rippey was born in Madison, Indiana, in June 1976. Her father was an engineer at a power plant. Her parents divorced in February 1984, and she moved to Quincy, Michigan with her mother and siblings for 3 years. She affirmed that life with her family in Michigan was somewhat turbulent. Her parents rekindled their relationship in Madison in 1987. She reunited with friends Lori Tackett and Tony Lawrence, whom she had known since childhood, although her parents considered Tackett an influence. Bad. Like other girls, Rippey began self-harming at age 15. Tony Lawrence. Tony Lawrence was born in Madison, Indiana, in February 1976. Her father was a boilermaker. She is Hope Rippey's best friend from childhood onwards. She was abused by a relative at age 9 and raped by a teenage boy at 14. Although police could only order the boy to be kept away from Lawrence, she went to counseling after the incident, but did not follow through. She became promiscuous, began self-harming, and attempted suicide in 8th grade. The incident happened before the murder. In 1990, Melinda Loveless met and began dating Amanda Heavrin. After her father left and her mother remarried, Loveless was moody, depressed, had trouble, and got into fights at school. In March 1991, Loveless came out of the closet to her mother, who was initially angry, but eventually accepted. In the fall of 1990, Loveless's relationship with Heavrin deteriorated, and Loveless linked this deterioration to Shanda Sharer. Heavrin and Sharer met at the beginning of the school year when they got into a fight. However, they became friends while detained because of the conflict. Loveless is immediately jealous of Heavrin and Sharer's relationship. In early October, Sharer and Heavrin attended a school dance where Loveless found them and confronted them. Although Heavrin and Loveless never officially ended their relationship, Loveless began dating an older girl. Loveless became increasingly jealous when Heavrin and Sharer went to a festival together in late October, and she began considering killing Sharer and threatening Sharer in public. Concerned about their daughter's relationship with Heavrin, Sharer's parents arranged for her to transfer to a Catholic school in late November, and the girls began to grow apart in December. Loveless and Heavrin never now improved their relationship. Events of January 10th to 11th, 1992. Before the kidnapping. On January 10th, Tony Lawrence, Hope Rippey, and Lori Tackett drove Tackett's car from Madison, Indiana to Melinda Loveless's home in New Albany. Rippey and Lawrence, though friends of Tackett, have not yet met Loveless. However, when they arrive, they borrow some clothes from Loveless, and she shows them a knife and tells them that she will use it to scare Shanda Sharer. None of the girls except Loveless had ever met Sharer, even though Tackett was aware of the plan to threaten the 12-year-old girl. Loveless explains to two other girls that she doesn't like Sharer because he's a copycat and stole her girlfriend. Tackett let Rippy drive them to Sharer's house in Jeffersonville, Indiana, stopping at a McDonald's restaurant for directions. They arrived at Sharer's house just before dark, and Loveless guided Rippy and Lawrence to the door, introduced herself as Heverin's friend, and invited Sharer to come with them to meet her girlfriend, who was waiting for them at a place called the Witch's Castle. Sharer said she couldn't go because her parents were still awake and told the girls to come back around midnight. Loveless is angry at first, but Rippy and Lawrence assure her that they can come back for Sharer later. The four girls cross the river to Louisville and go to a punk rock concert at Audubon Skate Park near Interstate 65. Lawrence and Rippy quickly lose interest in the music and go to the parking lot outside the skate park, where they engaged in sexual acts with two boys in Tackett's car. The girls finally left for Sharer's house. During the trip, Loveless said she couldn't wait to kill Sharer. However, Loveless also said that she found Sharer attractive and wanted to have sex with her, and that she only intended to use the knife to scare her. When they arrived at Sharer's house at 12:30 a.m., Lawrence refused to take Sharer, so Tackett and Rippy went. Loveless, who had previously harassed Sharer on multiple occasions, used a blunt knife under a blanket in the back seat of the car. Kidnap. Sharer is waiting for Tackett and Rippy. Rippy tells her that Heverin is waiting at the Witch's Castle. Although Sharer was reluctant, he still agreed after changing his clothes. Loveless sat in the back seat, hiding under a blanket with a knife. She held a knife to Sharer's neck as they got into the car and drove toward Utica, Indiana, and the Witch's Castle. Witch Castle is a ruined stone house, also known as Mistletoe Falls, located on an isolated hill overlooking the Ohio River. It's a frequent hangout for local teenagers. Tackett tells the girls that legend has it that the house was once owned by 9 witches, and that the townspeople burned the house to destroy the witches. At the Witch Castle, they took Sharer in and tied her hands and feet with rope. Sharer started crying, and the girls were scared by the headlights of passing cars, so they walked to a place near Tackett's house, stopped to get gas, and got lost for a while before finally finding their way to Madison, Indiana. Torture. Tackett led them to a landfill on a logging road in a heavily forested area. Lawrence and Rippy were scared and remained in the car while Loveless and Tackett stripped Sharer. Then Loveless hit Sharer with her fists. Loveless then repeatedly slammed Sharer's face into her knee, cutting Sharer's mouth on her own brace. Loveless then tried to slit Sharer's neck, but the knife was too blunt. Rippy rushed out of the car to hold Sharer back. Loveless and Tackett took turns stabbing Sharer in the chest. They then used a rope to strangle Sharer until she lost consciousness, put her in the trunk of the car, and told the 2 remaining girls that Sharer was dead. They went to Tackett's house nearby and went inside to drink soda and clean up. They realized Sharer was screaming in the trunk of the car. So Tackett took a paring knife out and stabbed her several more times, returning a few minutes later covered in blood. After she cleaned herself, Tackett took her runestone and told them about the girl's future. Lawrence and Rippy stayed behind while Tackett and Loveless went on a country cruise at 2:30, driving to the nearby town of Canaan. Sharer continued to scream and moan, so Tackett stopped the car. Sharer sat up, covered in blood, his eyes rolling into the back of his head, but unable to speak. Tackett then beat her with a tire iron until she quieted down. They returned to Tackett's house just before dawn to clean up. Rippy asked about what happened to Sharer, and Tackett laughingly told them about the torture. The conversation awakens Tackett's mother, who scolds her daughter for staying out too late and bringing the girls home, so Lori agrees to take them home. She drove to the bonfire near Tackett's house and showed Sharer to the other girls. Lawrence refuses to look, and Rippy sprays Windex at Sharer and taunts, "You don't look so hot now, do you?" Burn alive. The girls drove to a gas station near Madison Consolidated High School, pumped some gas into the car, and bought a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. Tackett emptied the gas bottle and refilled it. They drove north of Madison, past Jefferson Proving Ground to a location Rippy was familiar with off US 421 on what was known as Lemon Road. They placed Sharer, still alive, in a blanket and carried her out into a field next to a gravel country road. Tackett forced Rippy to pour gasoline on her. Then they set her on fire. Lovelace did not believe Sharer was dead, so they returned a few minutes later and poured the remaining gasoline on her. The girls went to McDonald's at 9:30 a.m. for breakfast. The girls laughed at how Sharer looked like one of the hot dogs they were eating. Lawrence was horrified, called a friend, and told her about the murder. Tackett then dropped Lawrence and Rippy off at their home and returned home with Lovelace. They cleaned the car and used a hose to wash the trunk. They then drove to Lovelace's house around 3 p.m. Lovelace discovered Heverin was at River Falls Mall and asked to text her, requesting an emergency, then told her they had killed Sharer and arranged to pick up Heverin later that day. Lovelace's friend, Crystal Wathen, arrives and they tell her about what happened. The 3 girls then drove to pick up Heverin and take her back to Lovelace's house, where they told Heverin the story. Although she didn't believe it was true, she comforted the hysterical Lovelace. Both Heverin and Wathen were convinced when Tackett showed them the trunk with Sharer's bloody fingerprints and the socks still there. Investigation. Late on the morning of January 11th, 2 brothers from Canaan, Indiana, were driving toward Jefferson Proving Ground to go hunting when they noticed something on the side of the road. They called the police at 10:55 a.m. and was told to return to the corpse. Jefferson County Sheriff Buck Shipley and detectives arrived and began the investigation, collecting forensic evidence at the scene. They initially suspected a drug deal gone wrong and couldn't believe the crime could have been committed by locals. Steve Sharer noticed his daughter missing early on January 11th. After calling neighbors and friends throughout the morning, he called his ex-wife, Shanda's mother, at 1:45 p.m., and the two meet and file a missing person report with the sheriff. At 8:20 p.m., a hysterical Toni Lawrence arrived at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office with her parents. She gave a rambling statement, identifying the victim as Shanda, naming as best she could the 3 other girls involved and describing the main events of the previous night. Shipley contacted the Clark County Sheriff and was eventually able to match the victim to Shanda Sharer's missing person report. Detective Howard Henry went to Sharer's home, then obtained dental records that clearly identified her as the victim. Lovelace and Tackett were arrested on January 12th. Much of the evidence for the arrest warrant was Lawrence's testimony. The prosecution immediately announced its intention to try both as adults. For months, prosecutors and defense attorneys did not release any information about the case, leaving the media only with Lawrence's statement, which was repeated in the arrest warrant and contains context. General scene of crime. Judge. All 4 girls were tried as adults. To avoid the death penalty, all 4 girls accepted a plea deal. Tackett and Lovelace were sentenced to 60 years in prison at the Indiana Women's Prison in Indianapolis. With maximum time off for good behavior, they could be released in 2020. Lawrence was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and with time off for good behavior, she was released in 2000. Hope Rippey was sentenced to 60 years, of which 10 years were suspended for mitigating circumstances and 10 years of moderate probation. When the time for good behavior was reduced, Rippey was released in 2006. Sentence reduction. In October 2007, Loveless's attorney Mark Small requested a hearing to argue for his client's release. He said that Loveless was severely retarded due to childhood abuse and was not competently represented by a lawyer during the sentencing process, which led her to accept the plea only because of the exaggerated claims about the possibility of her being executed. Small also argued that Loveless, who was 16 when he signed the plea agreement, was too young to enter into a contract in the state of Indiana without the consent of a parent or guardian, neither of whom had consent. If the judge accepts either argument, Loveless could be retried or released immediately. However, on January 8, 2008, Loveless's sentence reduction and request to overturn his guilty plea were denied by Jefferson Circuit Judge Ted Todd. Instead, Loveless will be eligible for parole after 15 years, thus maintaining his original guilty plea. On November 14, 2008, Loveless's appeal was dismissed by the Indiana Court of Appeals, upholding Judge Todd's ruling. Mark Small announced that he would seek jurisdiction over the case to be transferred to the Indiana Supreme Court. Consequence. The crime has been chronicled in two true crime books, Little Lost Angel by Michael Quinlan and Cruel Sacrifice by Aphrodite Jones. Jones' book about the case became a New York Times bestseller. The story was adapted by Rob Urbanati into a play called Hazelwood J.R.B. High, starring Chloe Sevigny as Tackett. The play is published by Samuel French, Inc. in September 2009. Sharer's father died of cancer in 2005 at the age of 53. He was buried next to his daughter. In an interview with Jake Vaught, Sharer's mother on the television series Deadly Women, Vaught said that Sharer's father was so devastated by his daughter's murder that he did everything he could to kill himself other than holding a gun to his head, and that he drank himself to death. That man must have died of a broken heart. The Shanda Sharer Scholarship Fund was established in January 2009. It was written in the contract that the recipient would receive a plaque or document of some kind telling Sharer's story. The foundation plans to award scholarships to 2 students each year from the Prosser School of Technology in New Albany. One scholarship will be for students who are continuing their studies, and the other scholarship will be for students who are starting their careers and must purchase work, tools, and equipment. In 2011, the Dr. Phil aired a 2-part crime series, which included interviews with Shanda's mother and sister, who also faced off against Hope Rippey on the show. In August 2011, episode She Studios interviewed and filmed both Melinda Loveless at the Indiana Women's Prison and Jake Vaught at her office for a documentary they were producing titled Scars Charlie's. Both Loveless and Vaught are featured closely in the documentary, which was submitted to the Sundance Film Festival in September 2011 for the 2012 Film Festival.